This was one of my grandfather's assets, which is a Central Nela. It's a sugar mill. It consists of 12,000 acres.
Born in Cuba, Peter Mestre was 5 years old when his family fled Fidel Castro's communist regime for Florida in 1961. Well over 1 million Cuban immigrants now reside in the U.S., holding considerable political clout in places like Miami, the exile community's epicenter.
When Castro took over in 1959, he nationalized all the properties and told all the Americans to leave the country. Basically, confiscated everything.
Mestre says his grandfather, an American citizen and veteran of World War I and II, went to Cuba in 1920 as an entrepreneur. Eventually, he acquired businesses, property, real estate, and farmland there worth an estimated $4.5 million. But it was all taken away following the Cuban Revolution. And as the U.S. and Cuba meander towards normalization, the issue of unresolved property claims is a major sticking point.
There are a number of fantasies. It's like a Disney world of opposition to this. So I don't spend really a lot of time focusing on that. What I do focus is in understanding better the legal system in Cuba.
Jose Pagui is an attorney specializing in land title registration. Like Mestre, his family left Cuba in the wake of Castro's rise to power, but relocated to Argentina. He first practiced law in Buenos Aires and later moved to South Florida. Pagui says his knowledge of the parallels in Latin American legal systems and their contrast with U.S. law could lend insight to the challenges ahead.
All countries have a right to take property from foreigners, offering, of course, some kind of compensation for that, and Cuba did. Cuba offered a way of paying that nobody wanted to accept.
According to USDA, America controlled 75% of the arable land in Cuba when Castro's socialist state was established nearly 60 years ago. Diplomatic strain led to Cuban government seizure of all foreign assets on the island nation. In response, the Eisenhower administration cut ties with Havana and imposed a trade embargo, which was later solidified by President Kennedy. The property rights of American residents, farmers, and corporations, along with those of many Cubans who also fled the country, became collateral damage. And under Cuba's Marxist ideology, seized land and property has been redistributed among the state and its citizenry. By the late 1960s, just over 5,900 American companies and private citizens had their legal allegations certified with the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission of the U.S. Justice Department. Restitution totaled nearly $2 billion at the time, which today, with interest, brings the bill to $8 billion. In turn, Cuba's counterclaims for alleged damage done under the embargo, or blockade as they call it, range from $121 to $300 billion.
The result of the vote is as follows: in favor 191, against 0, and abstentions 2. Draft resolution A/71/L3 is adopted.
For the first time in 25 years, the U.S. abstained from voting on a symbolic United Nations resolution to condemn the economic embargo against Cuba, providing continuity with recent Obama administration strides. But only the U.S. Congress has the authority to lift the embargo and allow free trade. Agriculture has had a small taste of it, with limited exports to Cuba allowed since 2001. However, incremental federal lawmaking has made settlement of the U.S. certified claims, along with separate claims by Cuban Americans, a precursor to the embargo's demise.
Every president has underestimated the Castros, I think. Nevertheless, it's good to have plans on the books for the eventuality.
Professor Michael Kelly at Creighton University's School of Law in Omaha, Nebraska, helped design a 2007 blueprint for compensation of expropriated property in Cuba. The report was part of a Bush administration effort to engage a hypothetical future Cuban democracy and recommended either lump sum payment or a bilateral claims tribunal.
What I think they should do is pay it. I mean, they were undervalued at the beginning. The 4.5 million with interest is now worth about 20 million. I think it's fair that you should be compensated.
Claimants like Peter Mestre say Cuba has earned a reputation as a serial debtor by repeatedly reneging on its financial obligations. And Professor Kelly admits monetary claims would likely be offered pennies on the dollar, but adds most companies are more interested in access to the Cuban market.
Most of the bigger claims are corporate claims. For instance, Coca-Cola, if you go to Atlanta and ask them, do you want this old bottling plant back outside of Havana? No, they don't want the bottling plant back. What Coke wants is distribution rights on the island before Pepsi gets there.
While that approach may work for business, some claimants, like Carolyn Chester, who also resides in Omaha, feel left in the lurch.
They also took over the radio stations, TV stations, newspapers.
Of the total $8 billion in claims, she inherited an IOU now worth $2 million. A small sliver of the meager $200 million assertion made by families displaced following the revolution.
My father worked hard for his money, He didn't make his money in Cuba. He lost his money in Cuba. He made his money working for CBS, being a reporter.
Edmund Chester covered the Caribbean and Latin America as a U.S. citizen residing in Cuba. He left for a stint in New York as the boss of legendary journalist Edward R. Murrow, but returned to dabble in telecommunications and purchased 80 acres with plans to start a citrus farm. Instead, he was forced to flee.
My father was a patriot, and that's what I don't understand, is why my government is not going to bat for me, There's a solution to this. All they got to do is figure it out.
Neither the U.S. nor Cuba is eager to pay out the sums each government demands, forcing complex negotiations likely to reach well beyond President Obama's tenure. But absent a resolution, farm and business groups fear potential market share could erode in favor of foreign competitors. For Market to Market, I'm Josh Bittner.